You're on.
Hi, I'm Linda Rowand,
And I'm Gene Rowand.
and this is our home, but our second home is Brushwood, at least for now. And we've been involved at Brushwood for how many years?
Since 1989.
Wow, okay. 89.
We took a 5-year sabbatical and went to a reservation and lived and came back, and we've been there ever since. Been pouring sweat lodge on Brushwood since 1999.
We do sweat lodges, and we talk to people if they're interested. I consider that basically my path, and that is one of, it's earth-based. I learned a lot when I lived on the reservation. It was a life-changing experience, and we brought it home with us.
I tried various and sundry spiritual paths for years, studied all the great religions, and
Some of them not so great.
ended up on a reservation where I found who I really was. And that's the path I've been following since. Brushwood, I was introduced to Brushwood in 1989 by Alex. And I'd never heard of Brushwood before, and I met Frank, I met Darlene, and Teresa was away at the time. And we just kind of set up camp there, and we've been there ever since, except for the time we was on the reservation. And that's home. That's our, when we go, we need refresh, we go to Brushwood.
We've been a part of the festivals, especially Cirrus. We've both taught classes and workshops, and we've both been a big part of the various rituals that go along with the festivals.
We were at the very first Cirrus Rising, which was the descent of Inanna, that Roy programmed or set up with Madonna as Ereshkigal, and we have been involved with it and the Brushwood visiting team since its inception.
Okay, next question was, where do you see modern paganism going in the future? Well, you know, to me, the question is, what exactly is modern paganism? That's the big question. So many things fall under that category. I see non-traditional, non-Christian religions or spiritual paths growing. People are more and more disenchanted with some religions that are very rigid, very much ruled and run by men, and it loses its spirituality is what happens. I had like an epiphany in South Dakota where I went to church in the morning. I worked with adolescent Native American kids who were chemically dependent. And in the mornings on Sunday, we would take them to the various churches. Now, this town was so small that it didn't even have a red light, and it only had one stop sign, but it had 8 churches. Of course, it probably had 10 bars, but 8 churches. And we would take the kids to church because the reality is most of them had no idea about their own culture. And I was in Catholic church in the morning, and for anybody who knows, you stand up, sit down, respond, and there's a lot of activity. That evening, I took the girls into the sweat lodge, and it's exactly the opposite. It's very peaceful, it's very quiet, it's very dark, and you don't have to do a thing. And I suddenly realized that I had time to pray. which I hadn't had any time in the morning in church. So I see things like that happening for people. Some have some epiphanies in the Sweat Lodge and some other places, but I see more disenchantment with traditional religion, so that must be good for modern paganism, I think.
I see neo-paganism as anything other than Christian, because that's what Christians consider pagan. You know, if you're Hindu, you're pagan. If you're Catholic, you're pagan. If you're Protestant, you're pagan, depending on what church you go to. And I see the neo-pagan movement very slowly growing, although I see a lot of disenchantment with it because there's not a structure. And more people are looking for a structured religion. People leave Christianity and they become white knights on horses and preaching what they believe to be true until it slowly erodes to a completely spiritual path, and other people following have a tendency to not be so enchanted because they're looking for something rigid. It's not like what they've been taught. But I see paganism growing, neo-paganism growing. I see it moving into different places in small quantities. But because of the drive of our society, people are moving away from to more freedom. There's no freedom in the structured religions, and more people want the freedom. They're not moving into paganism, they're moving to absolutely nothing. They're just wandering. So there's a great attraction, yet there's a great fear. There always has been, there always will be. Because God will get you. Good.